When Eilat Mazar realized she discovered an ancient structure near Jerusalem, she turned to the Bible to help explain what she found.
King Solomon is a name that gets everyone's attention. The Bible really talks him up, painting this picture of a king who ruled a massive area and was so wise he could tackle any problem thrown his way. Just imagine having a brain like that. People say he built the most incredible temple ever in Jerusalem and was the richest dude to ever live. Even now, we're still chatting about King Solomon. He's that legendary. And guess what? A group of archaeologists from Israel just found King Solomon's tomb. Can you believe it? It's been hidden for over 3,000 years. So what cool treasures and clues about the past did they uncover? Let's dive into this mystery and see what secrets King Solomon's tomb has in store. So first, subscribe to the channel. For ages, folks have been hunting for King Solomon's tomb. Some believed it was just a myth since no one had actually found it. But that's changed now. A team of smart scientists and treasure hunters, led by an amazing woman named Eilat Mazar, made a jaw-dropping discovery. They think they found where King Solomon might be resting, right in the city of David. This wasn't Dr. Mazar's first time at the rodeo. Back in 1986, she discovered an ancient gatehouse near the city of David, but at the time, she couldn't confirm if it was Solomon's, so she kept it under wraps. Fast forward to 2009, and Dr. Mazar decided to dig around that gatehouse again. Can you believe it? She stumbled upon a treasure trove of ancient stuff. It was like a time capsule from the days when King Solomon was around. With all these new clues, she took another look at the gatehouse and figured it was probably built around the 10th century BC, which is when King Solomon was in charge. So, why should we trust Dr. Mazar's findings? Well, Dr. Eilat Mazar is no ordinary scientist. She's super smart and has a real respect for the scientific method. Her favorite saying, "We must let the stones speak," perfectly sums up her approach to archaeology. She believes that the artifacts themselves hold the secrets of the past, and she's all ears. Her reputation is solid, too. Herschel Shanks, a well-known American lawyer, wrote a fantastic article about her in 2007 for Biblical Archaeology Review, where he didn't hold back on praising her skills, saying no one would dare question her as an archaeologist. Mazar is often called a biblical scientist, which fits her unique way of doing research. Unlike many of her peers who keep their religious beliefs separate from their work, she sees no issue with combining the Bible and scientific inquiry. In fact, she thinks they can complement each other, offering different but equally valuable insights into history. This open-mindedness is refreshing in a field where science and religion are often seen as at odds. Among the many treasures found at the dig site, over 30 tiny clay seals were discovered, which were used to close documents. These little guys could reveal some fascinating details about the people and events of the past. One particular archaeologist, Dr. Mazar, got super excited about a discovery that really stirred things up in the usually chill world of archaeology. Her enthusiasm was a breath of fresh air compared to the usual skepticism that comes with mixing science and religion. It was clear that Dr. Mazar's deep knowledge of archaeology played a huge role in this groundbreaking find. What made it even cooler was that the team wasn't even looking for Solomon's tomb. They were actually trying to find King David's palace while digging in the oldest part of Jerusalem. But then they stumbled upon something massive, a huge wall segment stretching over 2,110 feet. Locals call it the Cave of the Kings, and it's wrapped in mystery. Who built it? What was it for? The archaeologists were itching to uncover the secrets hidden in those ancient stones. They found a gatehouse, a corner tower, and a royal structure within the wall segment. The size of the wall blew their minds, and they started to wonder if it might be part of something even bigger, like a temple or a palace. They were pumped about the chance that this could be linked to King Solomon's reign. Radiocarbon dating showed the site dated back to the time when Solomon ruled. Dr. Mazar pointed out that this was the first time they'd found a structure from that era that matched the descriptions of Solomon's buildings in Jerusalem. But could it have been built by another king instead? Why is she so convinced it's Solomon's? Well, she explained that there weren't many kings in the 10th century who could have built something like this. Basically, it could only be David or Solomon. According to the Bible, King David, famous for his showdown with Goliath, was Solomon's dad, who's known for building the first temple in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount. They also discovered ceramics near the wall that helped date it to the second half of the 10th century BC, which was right in Solomon's time. Near the gatehouse, they found some big earthen water storage vessels, one of which had a Hebrew inscription from a high-ranking official. Plus, they uncovered figurines typical of the 10th century BC Jerusalem, like four-legged animals and large-breasted women, likely symbolizing fertility. They even found jar handles with inscriptions mentioning the king and various Hebrew names. All these finds make the discovery even more exciting and significant. The historical and archaeological value of what they found is huge, as it gives us a better understanding of that period and its people. Finding King Solomon's temple has been a dream for archaeologists for ages. It's like hunting for a legendary treasure chest packed with history. Recently, they found a piece of an ancient wall in Jerusalem's Ophel area, which is super old. People think this is where King David, Solomon's dad, had his palace. This new find is like adding a missing puzzle piece to the story of the area, making the tales about King Solomon, the famous ruler of ancient Israel, feel even more real. Some folks used to think he was just a minor leader, but this discovery paints him as a powerful king who ruled over a massive kingdom, just like the Bible says about the city of David. Named after Solomon's dad, it's believed to be the oldest part of Jerusalem, like the city's grandparent. People think this is where King David set up shop after kicking out the Jebusites who lived there before. Tons of cool old stuff has been found here, giving us a glimpse into Jerusalem's early days. The city of David, also called Wadi Hill, is a super important archaeological site. It's like an open book about what Jerusalem looked like thousands of years ago, filled with history from ancient walls to fancy stone buildings. It's like a time machine that takes us back to the Bronze and Iron Ages. One of the coolest things ever found in the city of David is the Solmon Tunnel, also known as Hezekiah's Tunnel. It's this ancient, clever way to bring water into the city. We used to think King Hezekiah built it, but some new digging suggests it might be even older than that. And guess what else they found nearby? A Roman-era pool called the Pool of Siloam, and a neat set of steps. Today, you can visit all these amazing old places because they're part of the Jerusalem Walls National Park, managed by the Israel Nature and Parks Authority, while the IR David Foundation handles the day-to-day stuff. You can find this park in Wadi Hill Way, which is kind of like an extension of the Silwan neighborhood in East Jerusalem, close to an Israeli settlement. It's a pretty important spot for archaeologists to learn about the past. Now, about those royal tombs. They found this massive stone building that some folks think might be the remains of King David's palace. If this giant building really is tied to David and Solomon, it shows just how significant the city of David was back in the day when they were kings. It was like the center of power and governance. You know, even with all the cool discoveries archaeologists have made lately, finding royal tombs for Solomon and the kings that came after him has been a real struggle. There are a few reasons those old tombs are MIA. Maybe the city of David is just so huge that they haven't searched every nook and cranny yet. Or with all the wars and chaos that have gone down in Jerusalem over the years, those tombs might have been wrecked or totally lost. They could even be buried under newer buildings. But these challenges haven't stopped archaeologists from looking for those royal tombs. They realize how big of a deal it would be to find them, since it would give us a ton of insight into the kings of ancient Israel and how they operated back in the day. Discovering those tombs would be like uncovering a treasure chest of info about life in ancient Israel, even if they haven't found them yet. What they have discovered in the city of David is still pretty awesome. Now, let's talk about the mysteries of Solomon's tomb. Before Dr. Mazar came along and shook things up, people were scratching their heads for ages trying to figure out where King Solomon might be buried. Some thought his final resting place was hiding under the Temple Mount, which is a super important spot for Jews, Christians, and Muslims. Muslims call it the Haram al-Sharif, or the Noble Sanctuary, because they believe it's where the Prophet Muhammad took a magical nighttime ride on a flying horse. That's why the gorgeous Dome of the Rock is there. The Temple Mount has a crazy history. Everyone from ancient conquerors to the British has wanted a piece of it. It's a small area, but so much has happened there. Just imagine trying to dig up secrets in a place everyone has been fighting over for thousands of years. That's the challenge for archaeologists. The folks in charge of the Temple Mount, the Waqf, aren't too keen on digging around since they think it's disrespectful to a holy site. So, while some adventurous Europeans poked around in the late 1800s and the British did a bit of digging when they were fixing up the Al-Aqsa Mosque in the early 1900s, no one really got a good look at what's underneath. It's like searching for a needle in a massive haystack. Even if Solomon's tomb is down there, it could be anywhere without a proper search. It's mostly guesswork. Old stories and texts talk about burying important people near the Temple Mount, suggesting kings like Solomon might be nearby. And since Solomon's temple, a big deal for the Israelites, was built right there, it made sense that his tomb would be close by. Plus, some ancient writings mention secret tunnels and rooms under the Temple Mount, which sounds super exciting. But without the ability to explore those places, it's tough to say if any of it is legit. For centuries, people have been captivated by the legend of King Solomon, known for his wisdom and wealth. A big part of that fascination is the mystery of where he's buried. Archaeologists have been carefully poking around the Temple Mount for a long time, hoping to find Solomon's final resting place. It's a delicate task because they want to respect the historical importance of the site. They've found some really cool old stuff, but no luck in locating the king just yet. Just imagine the excitement if they did. It would be a massive deal for history buffs and religious folks alike. But the search isn't just about the Temple Mount. Some people think Solomon might be buried on Mount Zion, which is linked to King David. However, there's been a bit of confusion. King David is actually buried in a different part of Jerusalem, not Mount Zion. Archaeologists in the early 1900s found some stuff they thought might be royal tombs, but we now know that's where David is. So, the theory of Solomon being on Mount Zion doesn't really hold up. There are even wilder theories out there. Some folks believe Solomon's body was whisked away to Ethiopia and buried in a secret spot. They point to some old Ethiopian stories about having things that belonged to Solomon, like his crown and throne. Another idea is that Solomon might not be buried at all. Maybe he was cremated or something. It's all pretty wild speculation, honestly. So, where's Solomon's tomb? Nobody knows for sure. Maybe one day we'll find out, but until then, the mystery keeps on living. Another interesting place archaeologists are digging into is Zedekiah Cave. Deep down beneath the busy streets of Jerusalem's old city is a secret world full of mysteries and old stories. Picture a hidden place in the dark with walls that whisper tales from ages past. So, there's this place called Zedekiah's Cave, but some folks also know it as Solomon's Quarries. It's this massive hole in the ground made of limestone, and people have been scratching their heads over it for hundreds of years. Think Smarties, adventurers, and curious travelers. Legend has it that this giant underground space, which is big enough to fit 5 city blocks, was a hideout for King Zedekiah. He was a ruler from Judea way back in the 6th century before Jesus, during a time when the Babylonian army was trying to take over Jerusalem. The story goes that Zedekiah took off to hide in the cave. A famous storyteller named Rashi spun a wild tale about Zedekiah's escape. He says the king was hiding in the cave and darted through its twisty tunnels toward the plains of Jericho. While Zedekiah was sneaking around in the dark, something incredible happened. They say God sent a deer to run above ground, and it led the soldiers chasing the king right to the cave's exit, just as Zedekiah popped out. That's how they caught him and made him blind. Pretty spooky, right? This story definitely adds some intrigue to the cave, but what really gets people buzzing is its connection to the Freemasons. They believe Zedekiah's cave is special and that it was a meeting spot for the Knights Templar. They even think the cave has secret symbols and codes, hiding some deep knowledge, although there's no solid proof for that. Now, let's talk about debunking some myths. Before people started digging around, everyone had their own theories about where Solomon's final resting place might be. Archaeologists, scientists, and history buffs all had their guesses. A lot of them pointed to Mount Zion, a hill in Jerusalem closely linked to the city of David, thinking it could be the royal graveyard for the Davidic dynasty, including good old King Solomon. But here's the kicker: they were barking up the wrong tree. It's a common misconception that King David is buried on Mount Zion. Nope, that's not right. His actual tomb is in the southeastern corner of Jerusalem's old city, just below the Temple Mount. This area is known today as either David or the City of David. The Bible, in the book of 1 Kings, tells us that David died and was laid to rest in the City of David. It also lays out a timeline. David ruled Israel for 40 years, 7 in Hebron and 33 in Jerusalem. After he passed, his son Solomon took the reins. Now, let's clear up something about Zion. When people mention Zion, they're usually talking about ancient Jerusalem. But there was a mix-up back in the Middle Ages. Pilgrims from the Byzantine Empire got a bit lost and thought the hills south of the Armenian Quarter in today's Old City were part of the Old City. So they went ahead and called it Mount Zion. The truth is, the city David conquered was on a lower hill south of the Temple Mount. This was originally a Jebusite city, but David made it his capital for over 200 years. That was basically the whole of Jerusalem back then. Later, the city expanded westward, eventually including the area we now call Mount Zion. So, for ages, people had the wrong idea about where King David was buried. Then, in the 2nd century, Jerusalem got into some serious trouble. The city was destroyed, Jews were kicked out of their homes, and people started forgetting where David's tomb was. Luckily, the Bible gives us a clue, saying that David, Solomon, and a bunch of other Judah kings over the next 150 years were buried in Ir David, which probably refers to part of today's City of David. Now let's rewind to some early archaeological discoveries. Back in 1913, a French guy named Raymond started digging around in Jerusalem's City of David. He thought he might find some old tombs, maybe even the final resting place of those early kings from the Old Testament. Some people weren't convinced by his ideas, but another archaeologist named Jeff Zorn thinks Raymond might have been onto something. For a long time, folks believed King David's tomb was on Mount Zion, thanks to a historian named Josephus, who said so in the 1st century. But if you check out the old Bible stories, it sounds like David and the other kings from that time were buried closer to the southern end of the old city of David. Jeff Zorn has a pretty interesting theory. He thinks there might be 2 old tunnels in the city of David where those early kings were buried ages ago. Back in the 1800s, a diplomat named Charles Clermont Ganneau thought something fishy was going on. He figured the curvy path of Hezekiah's tunnel was made to avoid messing with the old king's graves. Raymond started digging on some land owned by a guy called Baron Rothschild in 1913, then kept going in 1914, and again from 1923 to 1924. Even though people messed things up later on, Raymond found some pretty cool stuff. Old walls, ritual pools, water tanks, and a tower that might have been for pigeons. Sounds kind of mysterious, right? But the coolest part: 9 spots carved into the rock that look like tombs. This guy thought the fancy ones, T1, T2, and T3, could be where the Old Testament kings were buried. Some people even think Solomon's tomb was hidden on purpose to keep the bad guys away. Apparently, that was a common thing to do with royal graves back in the day. Others speculate that Solomon might actually be buried somewhere else, maybe outside the old city of David, thanks to all the political and religious drama during those wild times. Now, let's chat about the Tomb of the Kings in Jerusalem. It's open to visitors now, but for ages, folks thought it was where King David and King Solomon were laid to rest. Turns out, that's not exactly the case, but the name stuck. This place is super old, built around the year 100. A French explorer named Louis Feliciano, who was checking the area out in 1863, was one of the first to really dig into it. He was hoping to find proof that David and Solomon were buried there, and some say his digs kick-started modern archaeology in Jerusalem. He found some ancient coffins, and one of them, with some writing on it, is now in a famous museum in Paris. Picture this: a dark, old room filled with shadows. That's where King Solomon's body was chilling for thousands of years. Dr. Jonathan Hayes, a smart archaeologist, is peering at the body, his breath making little clouds in the cold air. After 3,000 years, they finally opened the tomb where Solomon was supposed to be. And guess what? They find his crown, all covered in shiny sapphires, with cool pictures showing how wise and strong he was. As Hayes carefully examines the king's fancy walking stick, a sense of wonder fills the ancient burial place. The walls are covered in scrolls that everyone thought were lost forever. These scrolls tell stories about teaming up with other countries and conquering lands which changed the world ages ago. One scroll was in amazing shape and had Solomon's own thoughts on fairness and governance. The writing was beautiful, but a bit tricky to decipher. Hayes's heart was racing as he realized how much history he was witnessing. Could these old finds change how we view Solomon's reign? Every little detail, from shiny gold decorations to ancient coins, offered clues about a time filled with secrets and power. These discoveries were going to tell us more than just Solomon's story. They were going to reveal the complicated history of ancient kingdoms that have faded from memory. Hayes pondered all this and wondered what other secrets were buried underground, waiting to be uncovered. When you look at old stuff and consider what might be true, it sparks some interesting ideas about where Solomon's final resting place could be. Some of these ancient items, called bulla and seals, have names from the time of the Bible, even from when Solomon was alive. They're like little puzzles that could point us to his tomb. A bulla is like a tiny tag made of clay or soft metal. Ages ago, people used these to make sure important documents couldn't be tampered with. About 8,000 years back, farmers in a place called Sumer used little clay tags to keep track of their livestock. Later, they started writing on clay instead of using those tags, and that's how writing began around 3,100 years ago. The first ones were found in a place called Zagros in Iran. After that, similar tags made of metal started popping up, called bulla. Most were made of lead, but some wealthy folks even made them out of gold, like the kings of the Byzantine and Holy Roman Empires. Now let's check out some recent archaeological finds. Not too long ago, some folks digging in Israel discovered 6 fancy clay seals. This was a big deal because it showed that this place was way more than just a sleepy little town. It was actually a bustling hub for running the country and doing business. The stuff carved on these seals is super impressive, showcasing how clever and skilled people were back then. They even found seals and documents that prove they had a solid system for running the kingdom. Imagine if they actually found King Solomon's tomb. It'd be like uncovering a treasure chest of history. Not only would it confirm all those old Bible stories, but it would also show us just how rich and powerful the ancient Israelite kings really were. Everyone would be eager to check it out and learn all about life back then. But finding Solomon's tomb isn't exactly easy. The land is rough, and there's a lot of chaos going on. Digging around and searching for things isn't simple when safety is an issue. Plus, finding one tiny tomb in such a vast ancient site is like searching for a needle in a haystack. It takes tons of time and planning. Even though it's tough and time has passed, people still love the idea of finding Solomon's tomb. There's a place called the Tomb of the Kings where they think some royals might be buried. So, guess what? They found some really cool stuff over there. In the city of David, they discovered seals with the names of kings that people thought were just made up. Everyone's super excited to learn more about the old days. But here's the big question. Is King Solomon's legacy real or just a story? Even with all the neat stuff they've found, there's still a lot of debate about whether figures like David and Solomon were actually real. For example, some people digging around think they've found Solomon's stables in Megiddo, which is also where they believe Armageddon will go down. The Bible says Solomon had tons of horses and chariots in Megiddo and a couple of other cities, but when they checked it out, they didn't find any horse bones or anything that looked like stables. So that's a bit of a head-scratcher. People have also been on the lookout for Solomon's famous mines since he needed a lot of materials to build the first temple. Most of the time they haven't found much, but back in 2017, someone discovered an old copper mine in Jordan that dates back to around Solomon's time. If Israel had control of that mine, they could have gotten really rich and had plenty of resources without just digging around for stuff. Biblical scholars have been taking a closer look at the stories about Solomon. There are some wild tales, like him having 700 wives and 300 girlfriends. That's a lot of people. They even say one of his wives was the pharaoh's daughter. But there's no evidence of that in Egyptian history. People think Egyptian kings were worried about giving away their daughters because it could cause issues. One of the craziest stories is that Solomon had a whopping 1,400 chariots. That's a massive army, but we haven't found solid proof of his stables. Plus, the Bible mentions that the Egyptian king Shusha came and whooped Israel just 5 years after Solomon died, taking all the temple treasures. If that's true, Solomon's army might not have been as strong as these big stories suggest. Some scholars think maybe they made Solomon sound way cooler than he really was. probably to make their people seem as important as other famous kingdoms. Now, Solomon's legacy really sticks around in modern culture. He's known for his incredible wisdom and wealth, and his story has inspired tons of artists, writers, and filmmakers who put their own spin on it. In books, Solomon's legendary wisdom and famous sayings are often used to tackle moral dilemmas and the quest for wisdom. He's like the ultimate wise king, showing up in stories where leadership and moral choices are key themes. For example, modern authors like Dan Brown have mixed in elements of Solomon's wisdom into their thrilling novels, using both historical and mythical bits from his reign to create secretive plots. In movies and TV shows, Solomon is often shown as a builder of the first temple and someone with complicated personal relationships. Films like The Kingdom of Solomon depict him as a wise yet troubled king, dealing with divine expectations and his own flaws. These portrayals not only bring the biblical story to life, but also spark discussions about modern issues like leadership, governance, and morality. Solomon's influence even reaches into the arts, where his famous judgment of splitting the baby is a common theme in paintings and sculptures, symbolizing true wisdom and justice. His image and things linked to his reign, like the Seal of Solomon, are iconic symbols in esoteric traditions and pop up a lot in decorative arts. In education, Solomon's proverbs are often used to teach values like discernment, justice, and prudence. King Solomon often comes up in talks about ethical leadership. People use his story as a way to think about tough decisions. His legacy adds depth to culture and continues to inspire us when we reflect on human nature, governance, and wisdom. Even today, Solomon is still a lively and relevant character in our global culture. Now, when it comes to the hunt for real-life evidence of King Solomon's reign, things get pretty heated. Scholars and archaeologists have been debating how to match up biblical stories with actual artifacts, and it's not always easy. A big sticking point is figuring out when certain structures and artifacts are from. Techniques like radiocarbon dating and stratigraphy can either back up or challenge the traditional timelines found in the Bible. For instance, the dating of fortifications at places like Megiddo, Hazor, and Gaza has sparked arguments about whether they really date back to Solomon's time or if they're from later periods. These debates aren't just for the academics. They actually matter for understanding the historical and cultural backdrop of ancient Israel. Plus, the mix of archaeology with political and religious beliefs makes things even trickier. Excavations in sensitive spots like Jerusalem can get tense because what's found can affect land claims and cultural rights. With so many people having a stake in the findings, archaeological digs and their interpretations are often under a microscope and can lead to disputes. Another hot topic is the methods used in archaeological research. Some critics say that certain archaeologists might be too eager to prove biblical stories, which could lead to skewed interpretations of the evidence. This has led to calls for a more objective and scientific approach to biblical archaeology. Despite all these challenges, the search for Solomon's historical trace is still super intriguing. Every new find could change how we see his reign and its influence on the region, making sure Solomon stays a key figure in both the study of the ancient Near East and in wider cultural and historical conversations. So, what do you think about all this? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for tuning in. If you like this video and want to catch more cool stories and facts, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. See you next time.